Case File 002, the Saturday morning that cost $8,000. Some cases arrive before the damage is done. This one arrived after. And by the time I got the call, the locks had already been changed. The tenant's belongings were already on the porch, and a civil complaint had already been filed. The investor thought he'd solved the problem when he actually created an $8,000 problem and still had to solve the original problem. This is Case File 002, and I'm Darius Harper, the licensed property manager and the owner of Real Property Management, Marble City. I want you to hear this case, not because it's rare, but because every self-managing landlord I've ever worked with has had this exact thought at some point. I own this property, I'm paying the mortgage. What's stopping me from just taking it back? Tennessee law is exactly what's stopping you from taking it back. And this case shows you exactly what it costs. On a Saturday morning, Robert, 41-year-old male, business owner in Knoxville, he bought a single family rental property as part of passive income strategy, like many others. Not someone new to business, but he understood contracts just as well as he understood people. And he navigated difficult situations throughout his entire career so far because he was genuinely confident that he could handle it. And for the first 2 months, he was right. He placed a tenant, we'll call Sandra, throughout the standard screening process for a credit check, employment verification, looked at her references, and let her move in. Month 1, rent was on time. Month 2, rent was on time again. Month 3, nothing. Robert waited the grace period. He called. Sandra said she was dealing with a temporary financial situation that she would eventually catch up. And Robert gave her a week. Nothing. He called again. More explanations and more time needed. Here's what I need you to sit with before you work this scene. This moment is universal. You have a tenant who isn't paying. They're not hostile. They're giving you reason, asking for patience, making you feel very unreasonable for pushing back on someone who's struggling. Meanwhile, you're covering the mortgage, the insurance, the property taxes on an investment that's generating zero income. Robert had given Sandra 3 full months of patience. Then he drove by the property one evening. The lights were on, new furniture visible through the front window. Sandra living her life like nothing was wrong. The investigation was about to take a quick turn. By month 4, Sandra was 2 months behind with no sign of changing course. Robert made a quick decision. He wasn't going to wait 30, 45, 60 days for a court process. So while Sandra occupied his investment without paying him $1, and he wasn't going to sit inside a system that seemed designed to protect someone who owed him money. He planned it for Saturday morning. He knew Sandra's schedule, so he hired a locksmith. He drove to the property. 20 minutes later, every lock was changed. He moved her visible belongings near the front door into boxes. He left them on the porch, photographed the property, back in his car by 10:15 a.m. He made himself lunch. Problem solved. 3 hours later, Sandra came back home. Standing at her front door, frustrated. Keys in hand, she tries the lock. It doesn't work. She looks at the door and looks at the boxes on the front porch. She tries the lock again. Does not work. She didn't call Robert. She called a tenant right attorney. Civil complaint was filed within 48 hours. I know what's going on through your mind right now. He owns the property. Like, what's the big deal? The court can see the context. 3 months of non-payment for her rent has to count against something, right? The court saw all of it. It didn't change the finding. Here's why. When I review a case like this, the first thing I pull is the statute. And on a self-help eviction in Tennessee, the statute is absolute. Under Tennessee code, there is exactly one legal pathway to removing a tenant from a rental property: a court-ordered writ of protection executed by the county sheriff. That is the only method the law recognizes. No exceptions for non-payment, no exceptions for the landlord covering the mortgage, and no exceptions for the tenant who hasn't paid in 3 months. A self-help eviction, changing lock, removing belongings, and cutting utilities, any method of removing a tenant without a court order is strictly prohibited. Tennessee courts don't evaluate circumstances. They apply the statute. The moment Robert changed those locks, the legal finding was already determined. He was in the wrong. Sandra was displaced from the property without legal authorization. Court ordered Robert cover her temporary housing 2 weeks in a hotel, which equaled him $1,400. The court awarded Sandra's attorney's fees for a clear statutory violation, which was a minimal $2,800. The court awarded punitive damages. The judge's language was willful and interferent with Sandra's right to quiet enjoyment, and that was another $3,800. The total civil damages paid by Robert this time was $8,000. But here's the finding that determines the case. After paying $8,000, Robert still had to go through the full court eviction process. Sandra was restored to the property during civil proceedings. Robert filed a detainer warrant with the court's General Sessions Court, served proper legal notice, attended the hearing, waited for the writ of possession, and he also waited for the sheriff to execute it. The eviction he tried to skip on that Saturday morning took longer and cost more because he tried to skip it. He was frustrated. $8,000 before the eviction even started. Then 4 to 8 weeks of the exact court process. He was trying to avoid all of that. Case file 002. The shortcut didn't save Robert anything. It actually cost him everything up front, then sent him back to the beginning, and he had to do it again. Here's what the correct process looks like from day 1. Day 6 past the grace period, a formal pay or vacate notice goes out to the tenant. Personal service, certified mail, physically posted on the front door, date, time, delivery method, all documented. Not a text, not a phone call, a legal valid notice that starts on the clock. The tenant doesn't comply. Detainer warrant filed at General Sessions Court next. $100 to $200 in a filing fee. Hearing scheduled within 6 days of service. We walk in with the signed lease, rent ledger, proof of notice of delivery, and photographs. Judge rules in the landlord's favor. Appeal window passes. The writ of possession issued. The sheriff executes it. 4 to 8 weeks total. Legal, permanent, documented. Robert spent $8,000 trying to feel like he had control. What he got was a lawsuit, a restored tenant, and then the court processes anyway. If you're managing a rental property right now and a tenant isn't paying, do not touch the locks. Click the link below. We'll walk you through the exact legal process to get your property back the right way without it costing more than it already has. Because in Tennessee, the fastest way to make an eviction longer or more expensive is to try and skip it.